Shalom, bonsoir, and welcome to all who attend, also in the name of our Director General and of the Institute of Art History of Munich's University. We have guests from all continents, and there are many people among us who are very important for our project and very dear personally to myself. Nevertheless, naming any of them at this stage would necessarily do injustice to many others. I will mention a very few of our key supporters later on. What I would like to stress already now is my gratitude that so many of the more than 40 families I am in touch with are with us today. I am aware that this is a very difficult day for the many Israeli listeners, since we are on the evening of Remembrance Day and on the eve of Israel's Independence Day. The date for this event, though, was not chosen by me. Our program makes part of the contributions for the International Day of Provenance research. However, in a way, these coincidences seem actually quite fitting for this program. And I know that a birthday dinner is waiting and that it is a short time break for the people on the East Coast. So I will try to rush and I will read my paper, and I hope it will all not take too long, but it will take some time, I fear, because we have 5 speakers. A particular warm welcome goes to these co-speakers: Peter Neumeyer in California, Tamara Kochicht in Paris, Ruth Bletzinger near Washington and Sue Skane near Oxford, Naomi Karp in Washington, and last not least, Rabbi Schwalb near New York, who will conclude today's program. Just a few technical notes first. We have a lot of listeners today. In case our data lines reach their limits, we would ask to put your videos off. But for the moment, we will try keeping them on. And we would like to give an opportunity for discussion. We thought the best moment would be after Naomi's contribution, before Rabbi Schwalb will give his prayer for those about whom we will speak today, and for all other victims of the Shoah. Until then, you have the chance to put your questions into the chat, both into the Zoom chat and into the YouTube chat. Anja Zechel has just tested that. Many thanks. My son Elias assists me today. He will collect your questions and pass them on to me. In February and March 1939, German Jews were forced to bring their objects of silver, gold, and other precious materials to the local pawn houses. And all this within just 2 weeks. In Munich alone, more than 2,300 Jewish owners carried between 3 and 4 tons of silver to that pawn house on Augustenstraße, run by the city of Munich. The order came from Hermann Göring, Hitler's plunder master general. However, the aim in this case was not to seize prominent works of art. In Munich, such seizures had already taken place in 1938, shortly after the so-called Reichskristallnacht, and affecting sometimes the same families as in the Gerngross case. In 1939, the precious metals were collected in preparation for the war. Some of them were sold to museums, dealers, or private persons, but most was melted down. Only the most select objects were sent to Berlin. Our museum, the Bavarian National Museum in Munich, collects works of art of many different materials, among them also silver, and it houses a big archive on the marks of German silversmiths. In order to complete its documentation, it bought for 12,900 Reichsmark 322 of these objects, mostly from silversmiths in Augsburg. In some cases, this was just a very tiny fraction of what the families had brought into the pawn house. The grandparents of our first speaker handed in 445 pieces. The museum bought just 4. And I show you here the payment proof for part of the purchase. And here a page with individual pieces and the prices paid for them. This document shows, in addition, drawings of the silver marks beside a short description of the objects bought. You see here the silver marks and also sometimes here. And the price is paid for that. The museum paid up to 10 times more than the compensation given to the families when they handed over their pieces. When all was sold, the state had made a profit of 55 million Reichsmark out of this Jewish property. In contrast to other museums, the pieces were fully documented, including the numbers that allowed the identification of the legitimate owners in the lists drawn up in the pawn house. In addition, some pieces, as this one, still bear the labels with these numbers. The inventories drawn up in the pawn house also contains the exact addresses of the owners at the moment of this confiscation. Based on this documentation, 146 objects were returned between 1951 and 1958 to 55 families. In 1961, the remaining objects were handed over to the Bavarian finance authorities, which until 1969 restituted a further 61 items to 33 families. The remaining 112 objects were returned in 1964 and 69 to the National Museum. At the time, it was stated that no heirs could be traced or that the heirs had no interest in the objects. There is no documentation to prove which attempts were made at the time, but the statement seems doubtful at the very least. At this period, some of the previous owners still lived themselves. And in most cases, the identity of the heirs was well known through the files on the claims for property the families had filed in Germany. Two years before this, in 1967, Karl Neumeyer's son and sole heir, Alfred Neumeyer, an important art historian, published the account of his youth in Germany. And he did so intentionally in German, with the Munich publishing house Preste. Just 2 years later, the Munich finance authorities could pretend there was no heir or no interest for the silver items of Alfred's parents. At the same time, the finance offices asked the museum to lend them the two big Neumeyer chandeliers in order to adorn their offices with them. Ironically, one of the headquarters of that financial institution was housed in a building erected about 1940. In it, the NS state had administered the huge sums pressed out of the German Jews. To acquire the building site, an expropriated Jewish building was given in exchange. And still ironically, or rather not ironically, silver victim Olga Meyer, linked to our third speakers, lived just on the other side of that street and had to suffer the construction noise before finally having to leave her home for a much more modest place and later for the camps. Who wishes to understand the circumstances of much which is discussed today should still have a look into Alfred Neumeyer's book. We cannot make these rather unsatisfactory attempts of the past unhappen. What we can do, however, is try to do it better now and to do it swiftly. In 2007, the museum silver curator Lorenz Selig made a fresh attempt to reopen this sad chapter and presented a groundbreaking study on the subject. 2 years earlier, I had already briefly mentioned the Gerngross silver in an article on the Gerngross sculptures confiscated in 1938. This is how the silver was kept at that time. After the museum had concluded projects on other works with NS Provenance, it started in 2015 research to reconstruct the history of the 112 remaining silver objects. The project was funded by the Bavarian Ministry for Education, Culture, Science and Art. As a result of this project, my predecessor in this job, Alfred Grimm, presented in 2019 a detailed catalogue of the objects and mounted an exhibition on them. In book and presentation, the objects were not classified according to periods or artistic merits, but to the previous owners. So it goes by the owners, both in the book and in the exhibition. Accordingly, the informations on the labels were based on the biographies of the owners, not on the artistic properties of the pieces. If you look on these images, you will understand even better why it is so important to return these objects to the families. Most are objects from the daily life of the families, and often from the religious life of the families. Many pairs of candlesticks, many kiddush cups, many sword vessels. And these silver pieces are in some cases the only material record that survived after the annihilation of an individual by the NS authorities. Already in the letters of the 1960s, the families referred to the sentimental value attached to the pieces. The entire project was mounted with the explicit aim to identify the heirs and in the hope these might contact the museum when they hear about the project. Therefore, in addition to catalogue and exhibition, all information was made accessible via the internet. So if you Google, for example, Erna Weimersheimer, the first hit you get is our database. We hope that families doing research on their ancestors would necessarily come across these informations and get in touch. Sadly, this hope failed, except for a handful of cases. So when I took over from Alfred Grimm in late spring 2019, it became soon clear that we would have to search for all the other heirs on our own. And I confess I had first been not very optimistic myself. The majority of the last rightful owners did not survive the Shoah, being killed or hungered to death in the camps, or avoiding such fate by going to our Almighty God on their own, as Anna Neumeyer would put this in her final letter. Some families were wiped out almost completely. So would we ever be able to find heirs? If we are now in touch with 2/3 of the families and well on our way to close half of the cases, this is far more than we had expected. The first base was information provided by the town archives in Munich. They were mostly already in Dr. Grimm's catalogue. The second and even more important base to start were the files kept at the Bundesamt für offene Vermögensfragen in Berlin, an agency of the German Ministry of Interior that keeps the registers on all property claimed by the victims on NS persecution or surviving family members. If the colleagues there found such files, these told us exactly who were the rightful heirs in the 1950s and 60s. However, more than 50 years had passed since the 1960s. So we relied upon the genealogical databases and other research tools available in the internet. Decisive encouragement came from the director of the Jewish Museum in Munich, Bernhard Puri, who laid the base for our success by suggesting how best to proceed. Many others helped as well. I would, above all, like to stress the very substantial help that came from the tracing department of Magen David Adom, the Israeli partner organization of the Red Cross. Once we had established a first contact, members of some families were extremely helpful as well. I just named Naomi Karp, our fourth speaker, David Birnbaum, and Mindy Nagorski. I also have to mention the important help of our intern, Marius Wittke, who assisted me for half a year and worked relentlessly on the databases and on establishing family trees like the one I show in this slide here. This was his masterpiece, showing the complex relationship between several Munich families affected by the silver confiscation. We have got so far now that I'm optimistic that we will be able to solve all cases and to make sure that none of the 112 objects will remain in the storage. This hope is further enhanced by the fact that we were offered generous funding to pursue the search by the Bavarian State Ministry for Science and Art and by the German Lost Art Foundation. This new phase of our project will hopefully start within a few weeks from now. It will be the first search for heirs ever funded by these institutions. Once I have established contact with the family, I ask for testaments. If there are none, we try to identify the persons most directly in line and invite them to agree among them what best to do with the object or objects in case. There are a few cases in which this is a comparatively easy affair. Peter Neumeyer, the first speaker after me, is the direct grandson of the last owners and the only son of the sole heir declared by the Neumeyers in their testament, written by hand hours before their death. I show a picture of Peter Neumeyer, whom you will soon meet in person, and his wife Helen on the day they received their objects. With other victims, this can be much more complicated. In the case of the Nussbaum family, our third speakers, there are more than 30 persons who have to decide about the fate of just 2 objects that had belonged to Olga Meyer. In such cases, the decision leads almost necessarily to a donation to a museum, in the hope that this institution will hold alive the memory of the last legitimate owners. In the case of the Nussbaum family, this decision has just been made in favor of the Jewish Museum in Munich, the institution that had helped us so much at the beginning, and in fact is still doing so. Another object will go to the Jewish Museum in Göppingen, the place where the owner in case, Hermine Bernheimer, had come from. This is the subject of our fourth speaker, Naomi Kapp. Other families opted for museums in Israel and the United States, as Beit HaTfutzot Museum of the Jewish people in Tel Aviv, the Jewish Museum of New York, or the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles. In families with less persons involved, there is normally an agreement to whom the object should go. Finally, there are families who have opted to have their piece or pieces rotate from one family member to the next. The process of looking for all closest living descendants is quite exhausting, not only for the museum, but for the families as well. On the other hand, the result has proved to be sometimes almost more important than the restitution itself. As a result of the Shoah, some families have been scattered all around the globe, sometimes not even knowing about their distant cousins, and sometimes having lost touch decades ago. To bring the lines together can mean a lot to the families. And these trees are also a big sign of hope, if one reminds the old Jewish belief that a person is not really dead as long as she or he lives on in many descendants. And I have here highlighted in red the members of the family murdered in the Shoah. The one in dark red is the owner of the 2 silver pieces we are dealing here in this case. And the fields in light blue and in full blue are the ones who have decided about the fate of the object. Zoom meetings as ours today can play a big role in bringing families together. This is again the same family of the tree I showed you. Families living on 3 continents as in the case of this slide, can thus communicate with each other in real time. We will do it more regularly in the future, and we already have some appointments for the coming days. In addition, the project might bring together families who have a very similar history. Peter Neumeyer's grandfather had been before Hitler the dean of Munich's law faculty. It turned out that his Californian home is just a few blocks away from Ruth Caldwell, whose grandfather Max Friedlander was the head of all Munich lawyers. Zoom brought them together a few days ago. It is not the only link between the families. Max Friedlander has been a close friend of the famous writer Leon Feuchtwanger, and some of Feuchtwanger's family members were affected by the Munich silver confiscation. While one object was restituted in the 1960s, the others will follow now, and the family is connected to us in this moment. Ruth's other grandfather, Peter Hahn, to the right here on the slide, was a brother of the director of our museum between 1920 and 1931, Philipp Maria Hahn, the author of the book to the left, and one of the really important figures in German art history of that period. Hahn's successor would be the one who would go in 1939 to the Munich pawn house to pick, among others, the object belonging to Ruth's grandfather. While our first speaker has already received the silver objects, and these have been reunited with companion pieces that always existed in his family, the one to the right here on the slide and the one to the left was the one restituted, other restitutions had to be suspended due to the coronavirus restrictions, as sadly the one to our second speaker, Ms. Kochrecht. We had already a detailed appointment. Many more restitutions have long been hampered by the lack of funds for the return of the objects. We are the more grateful that the German Foreign Ministry has signaled its support in bringing objects to families and museums in Israel and the United States. Contacts to the German embassy in Israel will also play a crucial role in these restitutions. We are very grateful, in addition, for the support offered by the Monuments Man Foundation and its president to this respect. In addition, Casey Shelton from that institution has helped us to solve 3 of the cases. The most important aspect about this project is perhaps that it brings together the owners of the objects from the oblivion. The aim of the NS authorities was to de-individualize the persons. In January 1939, 1 month before the confiscation of the silver, German Jews were forced to adopt the names of Sarah or Israel in addition to their proper names. You see that here in the passport that saved Susan Ehrlich's life, the granddaughter of silver owner Jeanette Oppenheimer, murdered in Treblinka. All material from this family, and it is a very touching one indeed, is online with the Leo Baeck Institute in New York. 2 years later, German Jews had to wear the yellow star. In the camps, if not murdered on arrival, they were not more than a sheer number. Even still, during the 1939 exhibition, we knew close to nothing about the owners, and in some cases, as in this case, literally nothing. It says here in German, no biographical data could be found. Today, we know a lot about this person, Max Friedlander. We can read his autobiography, in which he says a lot about Munich, and we are in touch with the 3 remaining grandchildren in France and the US. If we had photos before, these were the photos from the NS police files with the swastika on the faces, as in the case of Olga Meyer. Now we can see Olga sipping beer with other family members in 1980. thanks to the many materials that came together from the family. And we see how Bavarian, also other families felt. It was a tragical misunderstanding. The lady you see on this picture was a couple of years later in New York. And her father, a hop merchant, thus someone very closely related to the Bavarian beer, sent her letters from Munich in increasingly precarious conditions. He was 92 years old at that time. This is the last of these letters, written from the Barackenlager, the camp in Milbertshofen in the north of Munich. 5 days later, he was deported to Theresienstadt, and in the letter he tries to assure his daughter that he is well fed and that he feels okay for his future since he is still able to work. As I said, 92 years old. In all this, one must not wonder that the often unbelievable circumstances in which those who survive are another recurrent theme among the families. I must limit myself here to the story of the grandparents of our second speaker, Ms. Kochich. You see her on this photo as a child, together with her grandmother and her great-grandmother, the owner of the two silver objects. When two French policemen came to arrest the grandmother and her husband in their French exile, they suddenly said, "On ne peut quand même pas faire ça. One cannot do this," and departed. Members of other families had not this chance. They were first deported to French camps and then to Auschwitz. Ms. Kochich herself survived, working underground in France to make other fellow Jews survive. She was with the Jewish resistance Organisation Juive de Combat, smuggling forced papers to refugees in southwest France. History becomes even more absurd if we remember that Elise's husband, the husband of the owner of the silver, had been a member of the Bavarian parliament. It is written here on his tombstone. As many of the families had played a central role in the political, social, cultural, economic, and scholarly life of Munich and Bavaria. The loss for Bavaria is irreplaceable. For the families, the tragedy often did not end once they had gained their freedom. Silver owner Fanny Feust, her brother, her parents, and 4 other members of the family fell victim to a German bomb on London in September 1940. Her husband had been murdered in Dachau. One of his sisters was to be murdered in Lithuania. Rudy Friedlander, grandson of silver owner Max Friedlander, here the second from the right, with his parents, joins the Special Air Service. On the night of 12 to 13 August 1944, he was parachuted into German-occupied France. He was captured and probably tortured before being executed. His younger brother, whom you see here to the right, wrote a book on his fate. It is sadly not even available in German libraries. Peter Steele, alias Peter Wilhelm Salomon, nephew of silver owner Friedrich Sigmund Marx, murdered in Theresienstadt, and of his wife Anna Hirschberg, murdered in Auschwitz, was desperate that the US Army declined to accept his services to fight against Hitler, considering him an enemy alien. After learning that the Royal Canadian Air Force might do otherwise, he decided to swim the Detroit River to get into Canada. He drowned in May 1942. To end on a more positive note, there's yet another pattern, and this is how attached many families still feel to Munich, despite all what has happened, and how much they treasure the few objects they have been able to take with them. I show, as one example among many, Frank Simon Hermann's view of a nocturnal Munich landscape from 1898. There are the family portraits, not all with a light note either. This portrait by Joseph Oppenheimer shows Mina Löffler, murdered in 1942 in Latvia. Her mother, the owner of that family's silver, did not survive either. This portrait on porcelain shows Sarah Gerngross, who had herself been trained to paint on porcelain. Two of her siblings were murdered. How much the memory of the Munich ancestors is cherished transcends not only from this portrait. A great-granddaughter of Sarah Gerngross was married last September, and she had linen from Sarah Gerngross as her chuppah and as a pillow to hold the wedding rings. And also in this case, there's the next generation to continue these traditions. If proof was needed, all this stresses once more how important it is that the silver objects go back to the families. As another positive mark, I would like to draw attention to the initiatives in Munich to preserve the memory of the families evicted and all too often murdered. In 2019, memorial plaques for Anna and Karl Neumeyer were erected in front of their house in Königenstraße. And a few months later, there was a warm welcome for a son and two grandsons of Peter inside that house. In parallel, the house erected by Max Friedlander has been purchased by a man who tried to reconstruct its original disposition and even decoration with enormous diligence and in close touch with Max's son Gerhard, the author of that book I had shown before. There's even a Friedlander nameplate once again at the door. As this owner, I wander through Munich with different eyes now. When I pass the houses where the Götz siblings lived, where Olga Meyer lived, where the Sundheimer family had their shop, the photo comes from a family album. Now there's a museum inside that building, and that museum itself bought Jewish silver in the 1930s. Or if I wander past the building that replaces the store of the Löffler family just across the street from Munich's town hall, you see on the right-hand side, or the equally rebuilt site where Elise Maison once lived. Or finally, the street of Hermine Bernheimer, who lived very close to Munich's main synagogue, on a spot today occupied by big department stores. And I certainly found quite a number of unexpected friends from very different generations spread by our ancestors all over the world. And I'm now more than happy to pass the word on to them. Once more, the synagogue. And the email address if you want to send questions or comments. We start now with the speakers from the families, with Peter Neumeyer, who is himself a renowned scholar on literature, a specialist, also a bit ironically after all these stories, on Franz Kafka, but also a great specialist on children books. You see on the left one of his writing on this topic, and himself a contributor to children books, as these quite famous books he did together with Edward Gorey. And I finish with an image of his grandparents, Anna and Karl. He lived a year with them in Munich while his parents installed themselves in California. His parents, that was his art historian that I mentioned, Alfred. And after that year, Anna brought him by ship and train over to the United States just to return to Munich. So he was a small child, but he lived very intensely this year in the mid-1930s in Munich. And I finished my presentation with this photo showing him together with his grandfather. And now the word is on to you, Peter.
I will put Peter on spot that right now. 1 second. Yes.
There you are. Hello.
Hello.
Good morning for you. You are in California.
Yes, I am. Oh, Matthias, that was wonderful. An extraordinary and difficult and big job you've been doing for so long. And I just think it's amazing how you've done it. So thank you from very many of us. What I'm going to talk about is really an exercise in memory. I'm short on facts, but I can nudge myself into the present by saying, my name is Peter Florian Neumeyer. I love that name, Florian, and I've taken it up in the last year again. Saint Florian was a Roman soldier who is pictured on Bavarian barn sides I've seen in travels, emptying a bucket of water onto fires. He's, I think, become the patron saint of fire departments. So I relish that, my Bavarian Austrian name, Florian, and I revived it in the recent past. What I'm going to try to do is really speak sort of, well, Nabokov had a book, an autobiography he called Speak Memory. And I'm wanting my memory to speak, but it's really, every time I try, it's a whisper. And the whisper gets less audible all the time. So the pictures in my mind are really like a child's watercolors, which run into each other and wiggle and are indistinct. And I never quite know whether what I'm saying is really a memory or a memory of my having said it before. It's a strange exercise and a strange feeling. But as Matthias said, my parents came to the United States in 1935. That's a fact. And I was with my parents in 35 and 36 for about 1 year in Königenstraße, 35a. In those days, there were houses, I remember, on both sides of the street. At a certain point, the houses on the east side of the street were all cleared off. So it was a clear run somehow to the Englischer Garten. The house was spaciously 10 rooms, as I learned from various documents, but I don't remember the rooms. The only thing I remember really is some eucalyptus branches in a vase. And since I think eucalyptus trees are sparse in Germany, they must have been sent by my parents from California. I wrote many of these things down in an article when I was 17, and I remembered quite a bit. But 84 years later now, memory is very fuzzy. But between the written facts and what I can recall now, I do know that grandmother Anna was a co-founder with Marianne Weber, who was Max Weber's wife at the time, and wrote much of this in her autobiography. With Marianne Weber and Bertha Rodenbücher, Anna Neumeyer was a founder of the Verein für Fraueninteressen in Munich, in Brennerstrasse. And in the 1920s, she wrote voting guides for women. And these were pamphlets, I think a small book, and many newspaper articles. I think Nazi rumblings, nationalist rumblings were stirring already at the time. And I think she was politically very alert and astute. I think actually much more than my grandfather. Karl, as Matthias said, was a legal scholar. One of his major works, a 5-volume work, was finished in 1936. Well, I'll get to that in a moment. But he also wrote, I think his dissertation was developed into several volumes about the law up to the time of Bartolus. That's pretty exotic and esoteric by modern law school standards. Bartolus, having been a legal scholar, an Italian legal scholar in the 14th century. My friend Peter Sand, who is recently retired from Ludwig Maximilians Universität, which I may refer to as University of Munich, has told me that Karl Neumeyer's work could have been a textbook, maybe the first in environmental law. It was volume 2 of a 5-volume work on administrative law. And Peter Sand, when he was teaching environmental law, still used part of grandfather's writings on environmental law. Karl was forced into retirement in 1934 for obvious reasons. And my parents, who were in America in 1935, did urge Karl and Anna to come to America. Karl wrote back to them, the last sentence is, "Here we are, and here we will stay until our fate plays itself out. Here we are, and here we'll stay till our fate plays itself out." After 1938, he was still writing, but after 1938, he no longer was permitted into libraries. He couldn't. Work became very difficult. However, the director of the state library, Bavarian State Library, invited him to work in the library. That was brave in 1938. And so did the Benedictine monks at St. Boniface in Munich, invite him to their library. And I'm thinking, I don't really know, I'm thinking, given the medieval orientation of work until the time of Bartolus, that could have been very suitable to be in the monastery library. So that in 1936, he was able to finish civil and criminal law till Bartolus. I'm not quite sure of my years here. In July 16th, 1941, my grandparents were reduced to one room in their house, and the next day they were to leave that. Who knows for where? So the night of July 16th, 1941, together, they committed suicide. The last paragraph of the last letter they wrote to their children reads, my translation, for the last paragraph. For you children, the sun still shines. Treasure every good hour. Stick together and be generous toward other human beings. My love is with you as long as I have breath. Papa. Now there is a plaque in Neumeyer Saal in a lecture room in Neumeyer House, which is the name given in 2008 to the Institute for International Law at the University of Munich. As for me and my memorable years there, fuzzily memorable years, all I know is that I was in school at Fräulein Ebermeyer's school, and the only thing I remember from that early education was that first day of school we were issued a reader, and in that reader there was a picture of Hindenburg, and we were given pictures of Hitler to paste over the picture of Hindenburg. That was my earliest or only memory of Fräulein Ebermeyer. For some reason, I was evicted from that school pretty early. I had lots of reading matter at home. My father had, as an adolescent, collected World War I boys' magazines. And these were full of stories of German heroes in the war. A nice article on Prince Ruprecht, which for some reason I can't get out of my mind. A giant octopus that pulled people off a ship underwater. Submarines, and an article also I can't forget about dum-dum bullets, which are bullets that once they're embedded in the flesh, evidently they spread and scatter the fragments, the metal fragments, so they're pretty lethal. Carl, my grandfather, worked in his library. He went into it at 9 in the morning and came out for lunch and went back until 8 in the evening. I didn't really see that much of him. The doors were padded, the walls were lined with books. But I do remember grandfather did take me walking in the mountains in Austria, and he would tell me a chapter from the Odyssey every day. I quite vividly remember my memory of it, the story of Polyphemus with a one eye in the middle of his head, and Odysseus grinding out that eye with a hot, burning olive branch. I was much more together with my grandmother, Anna, of course, who was exuberant and passionate and lively, and took me to walk in the Englischer Garten most days. We would prepare for that walk by eviscerating the breakfast rolls and taking out the soft interiors and putting them in bags and taking them to a lake in the Englischer Garten and feeding the ducks. So every morning we collected our Entenfutter. She would play soldiers with me, and I was 7 then, 6 or 7. We would play soldiers and play hide and seek. She was a chunky woman. She was not thin, and she would get very out of breath, breathe hard, and turn red in the face, and I loved that. That was very satisfying to me, really. We were very good friends. On Sundays, some of you may have had the same experience. There were concerts in the Feldherrnhalle. The square in front of the Feldherrnhalle, I have since learned, was a basic exercise place for SS. I didn't know that until recently, but there were military concerts every Sunday. And I loved those, and grandmother took me to those on Sundays. There were many military in the crowd. I remember thinking I remember very elegant ones in dove-colored capes with helmets with long plumes on them. I asked Anna, what are those? What kind of soldiers are those? And she told me, Feldpolizei. Well, what did she know about it? I've read about Feldpolizei since then, and they did not wear uniforms. They wore civilian clothes and were evidently professional torturers, finders of military criminals. So they were not Feldpolizei, but that was my delusion until fairly recently. We would buy Entenfutter, pigeon food, in little pointed paper bags, and we would feed the grains to the pigeons. And across the street, this was so wonderful, across the street is the Theatinerkirche. And every day, where incidentally, Prince Ruprecht is buried, I have learned. In the Theatinerkirche, there is a little shrine, and we would put a penny in that little shrine, and down the track would come a little Jesus, and he would come down the track, and he would bless us. Oh, there is one. That's wonderful. That's a replica of very similar thing. He would come down. Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't believe it. It's wonderful. And he would bless us with a sign of the cross. I bet this one does it too. And then he'd turn around on his little rail and go back into his shelter. And that was the high point of our outings. Also on Sundays, I believe, there would be military parades. I loved those. People would hang out their swastika flags. I don't think grandfather had a swastika flag. I do remember, and this seems incredible, but I do remember it. I couldn't have made this up. Grandfather had a checkered blue and white Bavarian flag, Königreich Bayern, and he would put that at least once in my memory. He would put that on the balcony in our house. The parades, the military parades that we looked down on were so exciting to me. There were rows and rows of SA, brown shirts, marching. And I assume Wehrmacht from their helmets, I don't know though, on the horses. That was even more exciting. The music was martial music, so it roused you to your bone marrow. And they would play kettle drums, which hung over the necks of the horses. So you would have one on either side of the horse. And the kettle drums and the trumpets roused my spirits. And then there were, what's happened?
Somebody accidentally shared a screen. I will try to put it off 1 second.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And then this was very exciting to me at age 6 or 7. There were the Hitler Youth. I wanted so much to join the Hitler Jugend. They had little daggers in their belts, and those daggers were wonderful. But my grandmother, then that all ended. Grandmother brought me to America in the spring of 1936. And what I do remember that somewhat because Anna wrote a 19-page single-spaced booklet of the memories of little 7-year-old Peter on the boat going to America. An imaginative work, putting herself in my shoes, 7-year-old, and writing my impressions. And I still have that, of course. But then she went back, and we know the rest of the story. Now, this is all sort of impressionistic. I really put best, I think, for my satisfaction, what I remember into a little poem, which I would like to close with. It tells the memories of a little boy, 7 years old. Well, I have to tell you at this point, only you know about it now. I have a scar in my groin. I have no idea where that scar came from. Grandmother took me to a doctor in Munich, I suppose, and I had an operation of some sort. And of course, I carry that scar to this day, and I have no idea what the mystery scar is. But it tickles my memory, and it tells about the little boy, 7, and the operation with a mystery doctor, and the playing with grandmother, the Sunday parades, the martial music, the SA troops marching along, and the Hitler Youth little daggers, which so impressed me. So I'm taking the liberty of reading what is really my truest expression of my fuzzy memory. It's called Scar, and it begins with a line I took from the American novelist Cormac McCarthy. Quote, "Scars have the strange power to remind us that our past is real." In fact, in a foggy past, in a rainy land, with leaden skies, under the hooked cross, the Hakenkreuz, the swastika, my parents having fled, my grandmother a socialist and highly sexed, my love and friend took me to a surgeon, likely marginal, who still would handle Jews. Little blood pearls, a tiny ruby necklace, would have beaded sudden, fresh, white, infant flesh, hair's breadth, near a laughable as yet single-use mushroom nubbin. He would have set his course with one steely slice, and followed brightly, laying open tender baby groin, from which like bursting golden bulbs but who knows? No one, not one, not even I now lives, who in my merry world lived then, made cockade hats with me, played hide and seek in crotches of old elms, and heard with me the mesmeric rushing tramp of boots and boots and boots and boots and boots, until around the corner came a mass, a wave, one serpentine brown dragon with black legs mirroring sun on brown, brown arms swinging left and right beyond the need of gravity or sense, and pennants, streamers, and the gaily tasseled kettle drums of mounted troops, syncopating to the tread that like a tidal wave measured the Massenmensch, engulfing the small boy who wanted nothing but to be a part of this, and have like each of them a little dagger in his armor-buckled belt, and meet his Götterdämmerung. Who knows? Prehistoric convolutions, crazy apocalypses, legendary cataclysmic upheavals. No one now lives, not even I, from that merry world. The fleeing mother is dead. The fled father is dead. The sexy, brave grandmother is terribly dead. And the small boy, one thought he had seemed to escape, for one fingers the scar on the groin. It is in a dark forest almost no one has entered. Is it his? Was it another's? The thin white seam in the dark, in the tunnel. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Peter. Very
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
And we go over to Paris now, to Ms. Kochricht.
What?
We go to the next speak. We give over to Paris now, to the other person who still has memory of the period.
My microphone.
Yeah, it works.
Right now. Well, hello to everybody. Please excuse my foreign accent. So I was born in Paris and don't have memories, childhood memories from Munich. I'll talk only about Eliza, the owner of the silver object. Oh, what's happening now? There's an interruption. Do you hear me?
Yes, again, the same thing, but I've solved it.
Well, I'll talk only about Eliza, the owner of the silver object. She had a long life, but I'll speak only a few words because little is known. She was born Eliza Nathan in Berlin with a silver spoon in her mouth. At 18, she married Moritz Born. The groom was 28. Union soon blessed with the birth of Paula and next year of Margarete, my grandmother. Tragically for Eliza, she lost her husband very soon and was now a widow of 22 with 2 small girls. I assume Eliza was supported by her parents and husband families and provided the appropriate care and education for her daughters. No details are known about that period, about her personal life, if she was a merry widow or an affectionate mother. So I won't tell anything about it and jump 16 years ahead up to 1892. She is now age 38, certainly good looking and well provided for. She married Carl Maison, age 52, a widower with a grown-up boy and daughter. Despite his Jewish background, Carl Maison made a career, as Mr. Weniger told you before. He was also honorary consul of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. I heard it said that the couple was invited on their honeymoon by the king of one of these states. A boy was soon born to the couple, but tragedy happened again. Carl Maison died after only 4 years of marriage, leaving Eliza with little Hans, age 3. Her fate was to live another 46 years through World War I and Nazi persecution. She died aged 88 in year 1942, the middle of the World War, recovered in the facility provided for old and ailing Jews by the subsisting Jewish community in Munich. It was the period of transport to Theresienstadt and other camps. Her daughter Paula, also in Munich, was not yet deported. Daughter Margaret and son Hans had emigrated in time. That might have been a comfort. Maybe you know enough of her. I have noted also the fate of her children, but maybe we don't have enough time. What do you say, Mr. Weniger? Shall I speak about Paula and Margaret and Hans?
If you still want to add something, I think you are happy.
Shall I add about, well, the children?
You are, if I may say to a lady, you are the oldest one among us, so you have the closest memories of all of us. So please.
I was a child when I met Eliza, only on vacation, because I lived in Paris. So I went with my grandmother Margarete to Munich to visit the grandfather and grandmother and met the old lady just a few minutes. I was 4 or 5 years old, so I don't remember much of her. What I could say is about the younger generation, or about myself, and that is not the subject. So I'll let you donner la parole to somebody else.
We thank you very much, Madame.
Well, I thank you for giving me the opportunity.
I really thank you. We owe you a lot to our contact. Then we would go over to the Nussbaum family. This is a family with a big tree. And you have already seen Olga sipping her beer. And now it's Sue Skane and Ruth Bletzinger who will have their say on that. I cannot hear you still.
Sue needs to be, oh, there it is, okay.
That's it. I'm there now. I wasn't allowing me to unmute. Right, hi, I'm Sue Skane, and hopefully you can also see my cousin Ruth Bletzinger. We just wanted to start by saying that we're very grateful to Matthias and to the Bavarian National Museum for the work that they've been doing to restitute these objects taken by the Nazis. In the case of our family, his good works have not only restored a pair of silver candlesticks to the descendants of Olga Nussbaum-Meyer, but have also brought together more than 36 members of her family, many of whom had never met before, or even in some cases knew of each other's existence. In just the past 5 or 6 weeks, we've been keeping in touch with one another through Zoom meetings, WhatsApp, email, and even in one case, Ruth has met in person one of our cousins for the first time. And this has been an unexpected, profound, and very welcome experience. In the process, by exchanging family stories, photos and documents that have survived the Holocaust, along with Dr. Weniger's efforts, we have had the good fortune to learn something about Aunt Olga's life, and despite her tragic death, to celebrate her memory. And Ruth and I would like to share some of what we have learned with you today. This is the basic timeline for Olga's life. This information is documented in an online memorial book maintained in Munich, and we're very grateful that this memorial book exists. She was born in Munich in 1876, married to Moses Meyer at the age of 20, and died in 1942 in Treblinka. And she's seen here pictured with one of her sisters, and then in 1920. to understand the whole family, you need to see how we all fit into Olga's tree. And again, we have Dr. Weniger to thank for this. And I'd just like to take a few moments to introduce you to some of Olga's immediate relatives. As Dr. Weniger said earlier, this is Olga in the dark red. But I'm going to start here with her parents. So this is Hermann and Henrietta Nussbaum, and they had 6 children altogether. Firstly, Clara, who died of diphtheria as a child. Then Olga, who was the subject of this, and we've been discussing. Then there was Paula, and Paula was married to Paul Nussbaum. They were our great-grandparents. They had 5 children. 4, they ran all the way along here, 4 girls and a boy. Next in line came Rosa. There we go, that's Rosa's tree. She was married to Nathan Folder, and they had 2 daughters, Marianne and Carol. Mina came after Rosa, and she was married, oops, sorry, I've gone too fast. She was married to, this is Mina, she was married to Charles Kahn, and they had 1 daughter, Susie. And then finally, there was Benny, who's here with his wife, Imogen. And they had 2 sons and then a daughter, Miriam, who's on the call with us today and is the only one of this generation who is still alive today. Although not the oldest in our generations, because we have somebody alive down here who is actually 10 years older, which has always amused me. Today, the family consists of 5 living generations spanning 90 years, from the eldest up here, which is Thomas. Oh, sorry, my screen's going too fast for me, which is Thomas, down to the youngest, who is only a few months old. And in total, there are over 100 of us. Back in the 1930s and 40s, these family members communicated with one another, at least in part through letters. And Imogen, Benny's wife, kept a diary from 1930 to 1946. Through the surviving documents, we've been getting to know Olga. We'd like to thank the wider family for sharing the documents and photos that we have, so we've been able to build up a joint collection. We'll now share what we've learned about Olga through a few excerpts written by Olga herself from a cache of letters saved by her niece Leni, the youngest of Paula Kahn's daughters, from Imogen Nussbaum's diary, from letters from Elizabeth Beer, who was one of Olga's nieces and Ruth and my grandmother, and from Emma Kahn, who was Paul Kahn's sister and part of the wider family.
These documents show that Olga was close to her family, that she loved them and they her. From Imogen's diary, which has been preserved and translated into English by Miriam, Benny's and Imogen's daughter, we learned from an entry of the 15th of September 1936 that Olga visited Benny and his family, who had immigrated to Palestine, now Israel, in 1934. And this is what Imogen wrote. Tante Olga is here for 1.5 weeks. I took the children to Haifa, where I fetched Olga. As the trains didn't run, we had to stay overnight. In the hotel, Olga found the children very well behaved in the first hour, but no longer in the second hour. And then they mocked her because she can't speak Hebrew, and they told it to everybody. And on the 19th of September, Imogen recorded, the children went together with Olga to the synagogue. That means they run in and out, play with other children, and climb the water tower. When Tante Olga tells them stories, they are attentive listeners. The picture books of the naughty boys made a big impression and had a success. Today, Olga went to Jerusalem. And then on the 9th of October, Imogen tells us that the stories Olga used to tell are repeated by the children exactly word by word, and they wouldn't use a different word. On Wednesday, we brought Olga to the harbor. And I'd like to add here that Wednesday was October 7th, 1936, 2 days before this entry, at which time Olga boarded a ship and faithfully returned to Germany. Letters from Olga herself also demonstrate her warm connection with her nieces and nephews, even as the family is scattering. We learn from a letter that she wrote on the 29th of January, 1939, to her niece Lainey, who had immigrated to Trinidad, the following. Today is Lainey's birthday, and it would have been more appropriate if this letter would already be in her hands. I also think that good wishes, even when they appear late, are welcome at any time. And I wish that you, my dear birthday child, only all the best wishes you have already long known. In a faraway land, you have established yourself with your dear husband in a house. May God bless it, and that you live there in peace and joy, luck and contentment. The letter that you wrote from the ship, it has already been a while ago, gave me great joy. I feel guilty that I didn't answer it right away, but every delay stretches out so far that to catch up was impossible. Clara was here 8 days ago, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Namely, as the visit was not just for me, but also for Rosa, who stayed here for 14 days. Here she, Rosa, also received the news that Mauritian had a little daughter on the 20th of December. Little Ursa, as Carla wrote, is enchanted with her little cousin. From Benny and Imogen, I've received friendly news. Their boys are already big, also mischievous. Susie is silent in 7 languages. And what's happening to your siblings, Rudy, etc., you are surely more up to date than I. A reunion with you is certainly no longer possible on this earth. More often, my thoughts linger on you, your Aunt Olga. Olga's feelings for her family and the circumstances in which they are living at the time is reflected in another letter to Lainey, written on the 21st of April, 1939, as the family depart Germany, or hope to depart. However, neither she nor Rosa will be able to leave. My dear ones, your letter, with which I was very happy, arrived shortly before leaving Würzburg. Namely, I spent Passover with Rosa, where it was, as always, very cozy. In the coming year, as long as I'm still alive, I will be alone, as Rosa waits daily for the parent certificate to be at last united with her children. The day before yesterday, Hans, who by the way was my father, embarked for Trieste, and on Monday, so God willing, will be in Haifa, where he hopes to be able to live with Rudy, his uncle. He came here Sunday with Elizabeth and Fritz, Hans's parents, so that I could have him with me one more day. He could go to Palestine on a student certificate, while Steffi, who is Hans's sister, aged only 13, and Sue's mother, headed to England on Monday. So Georg, Hans's brother, is still at home, who will go to the agricultural school on the 1st of May. And how are you, my dear ones? Have you, dear Lainey, become accustomed to your new, very unfamiliar activities? Hopefully, you have adjusted so that the change doesn't affect you too deeply. After all, your interest in recipes shows that you are a housewife, and I am happy to accommodate your request to include them. It was stupid of me not to have shown them to you in your new home, that is, to send you a cake. But what is not might still be. For today, take both with the letter. The recipes are on the 2nd page, with heartfelt greetings from OS. Now, we believe that OS stands for Olga Sarah, as she was required as a Jewish woman also to use Sarah in her name. And by the way, Olga does end up sending a cake to Lainey in Trinidad, but because of shipping restrictions and weight, she had to cut the cake in half. So Lainey only got half a cake. And now one more letter from the 13th of July, where Olga says, unfortunately, I cannot report as nicely and in as much detail as you, as the life of your old aunt is played out mostly in stillness in one's living room, in which from time to time, a lovely visit brings some variety. You can well think that news from distant loved ones continues to be a welcomed messenger. Only these should never be sad, as for example, the message out of Baltimore that Susie's little child has died. Unfortunately, separation is our lot. Several weeks ago, Emma's Ludwig steamed to Shanghai, and even the old Aunt Amelie wants to, quote, tie her bundle, unquote, to sail to America. Good luck on the way.
By 1939, Jews were being required to leave their homes and move to smaller accommodation, usually with other Jews. From letters written in 1939 by Elizabeth Beer, we hear how Olga felt about having to move. On the 24th of July, Elizabeth writes, "Today I'm writing to Aunt Olga. She has to leave her apartment. She is very unhappy about this as she's not yet found another. I'm wondering if Uncle Herman also has received notice. It's all a matter of who owns the house." By August the 27th, Elizabeth comments, "Aunt Olga has not yet found another apartment. She will only now take a room." This reflected the reducing circumstance that Olga must have found herself in. In October, Elizabeth is considering a visit to Munich and writes again to Steffi, "Perhaps we will go next to Aunt Olga, and if she has moved and no longer has any space for us, we will go to Uncle Herman." And finally, by the 5th of November, she is aware that Olga has moved, but not where to. We now jump to 1942. Elizabeth and her husband Fritz have been deported to Gors in the south of France, but she is still getting news about the family through letters. She learns that her father, Paul Kahn's death through Olga. On the 3rd of July, she writes to Steffi in England, "Please tell Auntie Nellie that Georg's last letter said he'd heard from Aunt Olga that grandfather Paul died some time ago. He was last with Uncle Herman. More exactly, I don't know, as this was all that Georg said. I ask him to find out more from Aunt Olga. When I have news, I'll write about it. Aunt Olga is now living in Munich, Milberstoffen." Now, according to Yad Vashem, 36 elderly Jews were transported to Theresienstadt from Milberstoffen on the 15th of July, 1942. And we believe that Olga may well have been one of those. It clearly took time, though, for news to reach the camps, and Elizabeth continued to write to and about Olga up until the 31st of July, 1942, which is the last letter we have from her. We know that she and Fritz were transferred to Auschwitz in early August and died there shortly afterwards.
Not to put too fine a point on it, Olga and many of the family met a tragic end. Emma Kahn, Paul Kahn's sister and a survivor of Theresienstadt, presents us with a poignant description of the loss in a letter that she wrote to Lainey on the 27th of August, 1945 from Switzerland. "My dear Lenine, yesterday I got a letter from dear Clara, already the third since I've been here. I was so happy with it, especially as I finally have received your address. You see how promptly I am reacting to it. I must confess that I was very astonished not to hear from you, as everyone I know who saw my name on the list wrote to me immediately. The two of us have actually always gotten along so well together. Do you still remember that I was at one time with you all in St. Ingbert for a visit? I always so enjoyed being in your beautiful home. Poor Aunt Clara unfortunately died in Theresienstadt, in that miserable nest, and actually of starvation. She was always more accommodating than I, and as a result, not as resilient. If you write to me again soon, I will tell you something of my life in Theresienstadt. It wasn't nice, but now I am here in wonderful Switzerland, in a so beautiful, pure paradise that I have to pinch myself sometimes to feel that it's me, who may now enjoy all that is beautiful. And therefore, I daily, yes, almost hourly, thank dear God for the miracle of my rescue from this hell that I was allowed to survive. Your poor Papa, whom I particularly love, already died in the camp in February 1942. I had congratulated him on his birthday, but he appeared no longer to receive money and letters. A telegram, quote, "Khan died of a circulatory disorder," told us of his passing. Now I know first what all he must have gone through in this horrible camp. I was glad that your dear mother didn't have to experience all that misery. Uncle Herman, Aunt Olga, Rosalbert were sent away to the gruesome East. I never heard from them. Nathan and Rosa Fulda, Amelie Beer, Adolf Heimann died in Theresienstadt. You can recognize, dear Lenele, how much heartache one had to go through. Many of whom I knew have written to me, and it is always a festival when the mail arrives. The memories are the only things to draw on. Give your husband a kiss from me, and you yourself be deeply kissed from your loyal Aunt Emma.
Despite these terrible events and untimely deaths, Olga's family survived. Certainly, we are scattered across the globe, an international, multi-generational family living in the United States, Canada, Denmark, Germany, Great Britain, Israel, and South Africa. Many of us didn't know of each other until just a few weeks ago. However, through Olga's candlesticks and the restitution efforts of Dr. Weniger and the Bavarian National Museum, we have come together and are learning more and more about each other and our family history, including that of Aunt Olga. This is an invaluable gift. We also believe that Olga's candlesticks and the family history associated with them can serve to address hatred and build tolerance. We hope that this will be the case. We thank you all, and now hand back to Matthias.
And yeah, this barracks in Milbertshofen were the same I told about the old man of 92, who was happy that he could still work and thought he would thus might live a bit longer. And also the place where probably the Neumeyers would have ended up not too much later after being evicted from their house, maybe immediately. Just to change the tone once more, I have spoken with Sue and Ruth that we will put the receipts that she sent to the family, so that to keep on in Trinidad and Tobago, I put these receipts in the chat now, so you can have a look and try to copy these receipts and remember
recipes. I think
Olga that way. Thank you very much for this. You really worked very hard on that for a long time and had started before we met. Thank you very much. And we pass on to Naomi with somewhat similar story in a way of the family reunion.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matthias. And I'm just going to share my screen. Just give me one moment. Okay, are you seeing my screen now? Okay, I will assume that you are seeing my screen.
We do.
Okay, great. Thank you. So first, I'd like to say thank you, Matthias, so much for the opportunity to speak today. and especially for your diligence, dedication, and compassion in this heroic effort to finally return precious objects to Jewish families over 80 years after they were stolen from our ancestors. And I have to say, listening to all this, I've been very choked up and also very amazed by some of the similarities between the families and my own. So I'll speak a little bit about my family and about the object in question for our family. My mother, Margot Karp, who is now 96, was born into a middle-class assimilated German Jewish household in Göppingen, Germany in 1924. My grandfather, Eugen Bernheimer, served in the German army in World War I and ran the family business making and selling liqueurs. The firm was called Barato, and you see one of their labels or ads on the screen right now. And I was well into adulthood before I learned the derivation of the name. It's short for Baruch Atah, the beginning words of most Hebrew prayers. How many of my grandfather's customers, I wonder, had a clue about that? My mom was the youngest of 3 sisters. The photos of my mom's childhood with her sisters Beata, or B, and Annalisa, later just Anne, suggest a normal small-town childhood through the 1920s and early 30s. Then, of course, it got tough. Anne was sent to a boarding school in England for a while by a Jewish charity, and then both Anne and B were sent to America in 1938 before Kristallnacht. So I believe this photograph here of my mother with her father in front of the family car was taken after the 2 sisters had gone to America, so it was getting quite late at that point. After that terrible night, Kristallnacht, my grandfather spent a month imprisoned in Dachau. And my mother finally managed to flee the Nazis with her parents in 1939, and then only because my grandmother's sister worked for the US State Department and helped to get the necessary papers. And this, I believe, was an identity card of my mother, and it's very similar to the one that Matthias showed earlier with my mother getting the middle name Sarah, which was certainly not the name her parents gave her. Margot and her parents were reunited with B and Anne in New York City, and they began a new life in the United States. For as long as I can remember, my brother and I knew that our mother had escaped an evil empire by the skin of her teeth, but I don't remember hearing anything about relatives who died in the war. All of the family members who we knew about or had met made it out to New York, to Buenos Aires, or somewhere else in the New World. Only later did I learn about Tante Hermina. In 1993, my mother contributed an essay to a Holocaust commemoration at a New York City synagogue. In it, she described letters she found in my grandmother's papers, letters written by my grandfather's sisters, Rosa and Hermina, the 2 aunts left behind. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble advancing the slides. Here we go. And here you see on the left a picture of Tante Hermina, who was the owner of the silver cup. And on the right, we have Tante Hermina all the way to the right and Tante Rosa in the middle. The girl in between is my Aunt B, and the other girl is another cousin. So Rosa had gone to Munich to care for her older sister's family and then married her sister's widower, a cantor at a large synagogue. Hermina moved to Munich later, after my grandfather married and no longer needed her to keep house for him. My mom remembered Rosa as youthful and engaging, and Hermina as the one who never married, gentler, sicklier, and more easily frightened. There were 9 letters and 2 postcards mailed from Munich by the aunts, between December 1940 and November 1941. The letters conveyed news of their daily life, glimpses of a few other family members still in Germany, questions about life in New York, the kinds of things you'd expect in a correspondence between siblings. But increasingly, the letters were filled with ominous references. Wearing their new, quote, decorations, the six-pointed yellow stars that German Jews had to wear beginning in September of 1941. Praying in their rooms rather than in the synagogue. And Rosa said, God is everywhere but has forgotten us. Thanking my grandparents for the affidavits that might help them emigrate to America if their number was reached. And finally, learning that they would have to move, but not knowing where they were going. Then the letters stopped coming. In 1945, my mother's parents finally heard again from Tante Rosa. She and Hermina had been imprisoned in the concentration camp at Theresienstadt. We know nothing of their time there, except that Hermina had died there in 1943. Rosa was in the first contingent of prisoners released in February 1945. And here, this is actually a newspaper clipping. The woman sleeping on the left is Tante Rosa and a young boy. And I'm not sure what newspaper this was in, but my grandmother had this clipping and now my mother had it, and I found it in her papers the other day. They were sleeping in a freight car after a 3-day journey from Theresienstadt to Switzerland. Rosa lived in Switzerland near her brother Hugo for about another year until her death. And my mother and father were married in July of 1945. And this is a photo that Tante Rosa sent to my mother and her husband upon their marriage. My mother's essay contained all I knew about Hermina Bernheimer until January 2020, when Matthias emailed me that his museum had, quote, a silver cup that Hermina Bernheimer had to hand in to the German authorities in 1939 as part of the anti-Jewish persecution. He said that the museum would dearly like to return this to the family. I learned that the cup bore an inscription from 1706 when it was presented in honor of a baby girl's baptism. It was more than 300 years old, but it wasn't a Jewish ritual object, and I had no idea how my Tante Hermina had come to own it. I felt strongly that our family should control the fate of this antique cup taken from us by our persecutors. Although I had never embraced the genealogy craze or had my DNA analyzed, I joined forces with Matthias to flesh out our family tree so we could identify Hermina's heirs. I knew that my grandfather had 9 brothers and sisters. We thought that my grandfather was the only one of the siblings with surviving offspring. Down the rabbit hole of Ancestry.com and the internet I went. And I learned that there were many unfamiliar branches of the family tree, and that I was very wrong about the fate of my Bernheimer relatives. My grandfather's oldest sister, Leonora, had 7 children. 2 died in Auschwitz. 1 son was deported to a Polish ghetto where he died. That was the tragic news. The good news was that several of Leonora's other children escaped the Nazis and emigrated. My brother, first cousins, and I had cousins in England, New York, and California we'd never known existed. My newfound cousin, June Seeley, and I puzzled over the fact that we'd never met, although we'd both grown up in Manhattan, were almost the same age, and I'd known Uncle Poldi, her grandfather, and she'd known Uncle Eugen, mine. And most surprisingly, I learned of a whole branch of the family in Australia. Social media and technology are great when you want to meet your newly discovered family members, especially in the middle of a pandemic. Paul Falkenstein in Melbourne, who I believe is my second cousin twice removed, rounded up the Australian relatives, and we had a wonderful Zoom call with Paul, his wife Linaire, his sister Helen Falk, his cousin Lynn Sputt, June Seeley, and my first cousins Ellen Candell and Rachel Schwartz. We talked about our most famous relative, Albert Einstein, about our still surviving refugee parents who are in their 90s, our children and grandchildren, and we talked about the silver cup. We all agreed that Tante Hermina's silver cup should go to a museum so that current and future generations can see it and learn about its terrible journey. We are the diaspora scattered across the globe, and the cup could find a home in New York, LA, or Melbourne. But in the end, we decided that the cup should be returned to Göppingen, the place where Hermina Bernheimer was born and lived most of her life. In 1999, my family had gone with my mother Margot and my Aunt Bee to a small but well-organized Jewish museum in Göppingen, and that's the, Matthias shared a photo of it with you before. And that museum documented the history of Jews in the area, both before and particularly during the Nazi era. That seems a fitting resting place for this little silver cup. I hope to travel again when this dreadful plague is over. I'd love to visit my Australian family. I've never been down under. I'll surely go to LA where I can meet up with my cousin June. And someday I will see Tante Hermina's silver cup in its new home, a home that our whole family chose with the freedom that was denied our great aunt. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Warm thanks to you, Naomi. This is also a very touching contribution. And, remembering our first talks and our first conversations with Laurie, who is also on the air today or tonight here with us. Thank you very much. Elias, if you open the screen before. Elias?
Yes, I'm there. I was just typing in the chat.
If you open the screen so that we see each other.
That has already happened. That was what I was trying to write in the chat.
Now I see you.
If you go to the top right corner, and I have Zoom in German, so it's difficult to translate.
Okay,
but,
so if you put gallery view, you have to put all gallery view to the top right corner.
You will be able to all see each other.
Rabbi Schwalb, who is descendant of another family, Neuburger, which we have not mentioned yet, he will conclude this event. Before he does so, are there comments that any one of you would like to make or questions? I think there was one question now in the chat.
Marita asked something. Marita asked Naomi if there was a relationship with the famous Munich Lehmann and the Otto Bernheimer family.
What was the name? The relationship with
the art dealers Bernheimer.
I don't believe so. Although it's possible, because I'm certainly learning about many family members I didn't know before, but I'm not aware of that.
It's not very direct anyway. The Bernheimers, the museum had a lot of silver from the Bernheimers, but this was among the items restituted earlier after the war. Since there was this is Munich dealers Bernheimer. There was a close contact between the museum and Bernheimer after the war. And Olga Meyer lived just across from Bernheimer, I told the family. So she lived very close to the Bernheimer store. Are there other? It has been a long evening, but I feared it might be even longer. So we are still under 2
I
hours.
thought about maybe right now we could try to make it possible for everybody to unmute themselves. So if there are questions, they can be asked personally and not in the chat.
Please do that.
So you can unmute yourself if you got a question to one of the speakers now.
Just have to put the button in the lower left corner.
For example, Debbie Engelson wanted to ask something.
From the Gerngross family. Debbie, I saw the child. The child I showed in the slide was in your arms at one point.
Look.
Actually, the Eulau family was on my father's side, but when Peter was speaking, I thought he mentioned the family name of Eulau, but I could be mistaken. And I'm also jealous of all of you who have so many relatives, because obviously our family did not produce enough to have a big family.
But for the return of the objects, it's easier.
Please, baby. Who's not happy at the moment.
The youngest Gerngross, yeah.
She's 12 weeks old.
There are a lot of people on the screens I had emails with, but I had never seen the faces. Mr. Weisskopf, we had a couple of emails over the last days. And thank you so much for that.
Can you hear me?
And David Haas, I did not see him, never.
Yes, we can hear you.
I remember May 18th. Let's see whether this will materialize.
Yes. I wanted to, may I say something?
Yeah, please.
Okay. My name is Ilana Zundheimer Selig, Israel. My mother is 103 in May. She is still alive. And I just telephoned her now to ask her all kinds of questions while I was listening to you. I wanted to commend you. You have worked with my daughter-in-law, Mindy Nagorski.
Yes.
And you have been so helpful to us. And this afternoon was a revelation for me to hear all the stories which are similar to each other. And I want to really thank everybody from the bottom of my heart for the hard work you put into it and the help you have given us and the hope for future generation, for our grandchildren to learn and never forget and to continue our mission. Thank you so very much.
But Mindy is extremely helpful.
She is wonderful. She's one of a kind. She is just outstanding. I'm so lucky to have her in my life. She's doing such a wonderful job. But thank you so much for helping her and being so kind and helpful.
I want to say the same thing. Matthias worked so hard. He was a nervous wreck. He probably won't admit it now, but he was a nervous wreck, and he had absolutely no reason to be, because this was a very wonderful thing that you did for all of us. And if anybody should have been nervous, it might have been us. We had no idea what we would see.
I slept 3 hours before that.
Thank you, thank you.
I am the granddaughter of Alfred Neumeyer. I live in Israel. I was in Munich, I think 12 years ago, maybe more. And I'm looking forward to visit there again and to visit the museum.
You are from Alfred Neumeyer's side.
Yes.
Yes, from the brother who was the head of the Israeli community. It's another Alfred. It's not the Alfred son of Peter, but the Alfred brother of Peter.
Yes,
of Karl, sorry.
Yes. My father's name was Karl. They named their sons after their brother's name.
Head of the Israeli community in Munich, yes. the last one.
Yes.
And he could emigrate to South America.
Yes, on his last years.
Norman?
Yeah, my wife is embarrassed to speak, so she asked me. She is from the Löffler and Zilberthal families. And I want to say thank you very much for your humanity.
This is a family with a 92-year-old man in the barracks.
Zilberthal, we have traced their genealogy back to the early 1600s with relatives all over the world now. The Löfflers, unfortunately, is left to Evelyn and our children.
Norman sent me this letter from Milbertshofen tonight, and as I could not sleep, I started transcribing it.
It's a pleasure to meet everybody. The pleasure to meet everybody.
And Ruth is from the Friedlander family, who's in the center. Thank you for joining as well.
And in him.
Matthias, my name is Roger Shipton. We've been in touch.
Yes.
So I just thought I'd say hi.
We are doing more Zoom conferences with the individual families in the future. With Mindy, with the Sundheimer family, we will have one in a few days. So I hope to see you again, Miss Israel.
Thank you.
Matthias, this is Naomi. Can I just add one thing?
Please.
Because after I spoke, you mentioned Laurie, and I just wanted to say you were referring to Laurie Stein, who's waving there.
Yes.
Laurie is a friend of mine who happened to be a professional colleague of Matthias. That was a big coincidence.
Much more professional than me.
My family actually lived in Berlin for a year in 1999, 2000, and I had the good fortune of meeting Laurie then, and I just wanted to give her a shout out because she's an art historian and her work revolves around provenance of art objects. And she's taught me so much, and she was a great help to me and to Matthias when it came to the Silver Cup and figuring out how to do the research and so forth. So shout out to Laurie, thank you.
And many who helped us and who pioneered this work were on the screens as well. So Alfred Grimm was there, and Marius Wittke and Casey Shelton. So thanks really to all of them.
This is Anna Maria Abernathy. And the amusing thing is, or amazing, that we were contacted about this because of my cousin Walter Marx, who turns out, but it's actually the connection with Peter Neumeyer is much equally close in our family. So it's nice to be reconnected with Peter and to Helen. Hello, both of you, and I hope we can be in touch. Thank you.
Actually, this is why Marius Wittke did this enormous tree, because many Munich families were linked in between. So it's Selz and Szkolny and Merzbacher, they were all linked some way. And we have always to find who is closest to the object. It's quite complicated work sometimes.
Hello. Just wanted to introduce ourselves. We are the Maison family, and related to Tamara Cochrane, and we enjoyed very much. And our son Jason has been in the museum. He's a ballet dancer in Karlsruhe, and we're very happy to watch this. And congratulations, Mr. Matthias. Very nice. Thank you.
I thank you for making all the arrangements with Tamara. I hope the pandemic will soon allow that I travel to Paris to bring the chandeliers to Tamara. They are still with us, unfortunately.
Hello, I'm the son of Marcel, living in Germany. And I also want to thank you for all your work you've done, and actually to let you know that next week I have my German citizenship test to become a German. So after so many years, our family will have German passports again, hopefully.
Yeah, this is another strange thing that unites the families. Although you are scattered around the world, the Neumeyers have all German passports, I think, and Mr. Haas, who was also somewhere there, has a German passport. And so lot of you have.
None of our family do, but I'm going to get mine. Hopefully next week I have my official meeting.
There was a law for restoration of citizenship if your family's citizenship was stripped by the Nazis. So I regained the German citizenship under that law.
I think that's what we've done.
I will be getting it hopefully in the same way.
May I ask Jason where in Germany he is going to be living? We go over there. In my heart of Berlin, I am, as Matthias knows, I was in Berlin when he was a year old, and hopefully had some influence on his great progress, though I didn't know him there. But we do go over quite frequently, and I'd like to meet with Jason.
I've lived in Germany for 12 years already, in Karlsruhe, so about 3 hours from Munich, right on the border of France.
Yeah, know where it is. Yeah, near the Alsace.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Matthias, there's been a question in the chat. I don't know whether you've seen it.
No, I didn't.
For your full email, Provenienzforschung @ and then the rest. And I thought maybe this hasn't been like planned beforehand, but I thought maybe after Mr. Schwab has ended this presentation, we could leave the room open so that all the families who want to maybe give their contacts out to each other can do that in the chat or via talking to each other. Maybe.
I think it's a good idea. We do not want to keep talking in the group after the final prayer, but if someone wants to communicate with others, we should give the chance. Yeah.
Well, you need to decide what you're doing.
And
Whatever.
I give the address in the and the recipes for the cakes are also there somewhere. And I saw that also the foundation was present that will fund the second stage of our progress, the director of the foundation. So I'm also very grateful for his support. I didn't mention him yet. Sorry. Mr. Hartmann, thank you for being present.
Matthias, if I could speak briefly before you pass the baton to Rabbi Schwab, I want to thank all of you. My name is Michael Corey. I'm originally from Chicago, and I'm a long-term museum colleague of Matthias in the Dresden collections. I've only been a listener today, and it's been extremely moving to hear all of your stories and to see you reconnecting with one another. But I want to honor Matthias as a colleague and a friend. Your work is simply remarkable. Your name begins with M, and if you allow me, I think 2 other Yiddish and Hebrew words apply to what you have done and what we're witnessing today. You are committing a moral mitzvah in doing this work with the compassion and the knowledge you have. And you are, Matthias, a true mensch. So thank you very much.
Please stop. We have urgently to switch to the rabbi now.
Maybe everybody can mute themselves before he speaks.
I was going to say a prayer just for the survivors of the Holocaust, but since this is also Memorial Day in Israel, I'll do the appropriate prayer for both. El Malei Rachamim Shochen Bamromim Hametzeh Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina B'ma'alot Kedoshim Tohorim Kazohar HaRakia Mazhirim Et Nishmot Chaylei Tzva Hagana L'Yisrael V'chol Eile Shemasru Et Nafsham Al Kiddush Hashem V'shenergu B'Shoah Ana Bala Rachamim Hastirem B'tzel Knafecha L'Olamim וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם, וינוחו בשלום על מי ישכבם, ונאמר Amen. God filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekhinah, your Holy Spirit, amid the ranks of the holy and the pure, illuminating like the brilliance of the skies the souls of Israel's soldiers, and all those who have given up their lives in affirmation of your holy name, and all destroyed in the Shoah. May you, who are the source of mercy, shelter them beneath your wings eternally, and bind their souls among the living, that they may rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
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 And thank you, Matthias. I want to echo the thanks of everybody else and just add my own. You have truly been a mensch and a great help to all of us.
Thank you, really, to all of you. Would have hoped sometimes that things go much more swiftly, but they will go. And thank you once more. Your piece will go to the Jewish Museum in New York. We did not mention that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you to all of you. I will stop the recording now, but you can stay inside and talk to each other if you want.
Thank you.
I will stop the recording.
Thank you, Matthias.
Yes. If some of you, because I saw that's why I had the idea before in the chat, if some of you want to connect, you can put your emails, everything in the chat, whatever way you want to connect with each other, or just, we're going to leave the room open here for you to talk to you. It was a pleasure to be a co-host, even though I only originally came here as the son of my father to help him with the technical things. It was really, really great to see how culture is being passed on and so many different people all coming together again. And it's really great. I want to thank to everybody who's been here.
Elias, is the video available?
Yes.